We are Group 5, and we're going to be presenting over Picher, Oklahoma, and Flint, Michigan disasters. So starting off with Picher, Oklahoma, it's a place you probably haven't heard of. It's this little town up in northeast Oklahoma that they had a really, really big mining operation. They mined tons of lead, literal tons of it ran from about 1891 to about 1960. There was still a little bit of mining after that, but that's when it mostly ended. And something important to note is they use these room and pillar techniques, where essentially the seam of lead was several hundred feet tall. And what they would do is just carve out these massive underground caverns, removing all of the ore and then leaving pillars in place to support caverns. So that resulted in 161 million cubic meters or yards of caverns, along with tons of mine shafts and tons of exploratory boreholes, which were just these tunnels they dug down into the ground. And they also created about 37.7 million cubic yards of waste chat. Chat are these, they're little beads of gravel. They go from about coarse sand to about a half-inch to three-quarter-inch gravel, and they just pile these up in big, big piles. And you can see here on the bottom, that's the town of Pitcher, and then in the background, all of those hills are piles of chat. And all of these are lead contaminated. So after the mining operations ended, all of the mines were underneath the water table. So after the miners left, quit pumping out the water that was filling them, so all of the mines filled up. And because they were exposed to air, all of the lead that was in the water, or that was in the ore oxidized, which meant that it was able to seep into the water. So the Rubidoux and Boone aquifers both started to get lead leaching into them. Um, Additionally, winds and weather in general spread around the chat all throughout the area, and eventually led to Pitcher being completely uninhabitable due to the poisoned groundwater and soils.
These piles of chat were just not just sitting there, but as soon as someone walked out of their house, they would be exposed to this lead and zinc extracts like dirt and soil that they didn't use. And so for almost 90 years, people were stepping outside of their doors, being exposed to this type of stuff. Um, in 2009, EPA implemented a buyout for all the residents in the area, and the population quickly dropped from about 1,600 people to about 20 people in one decade.
Actually, I'm going to talk about the ethical and criminal issues related to Pitcher. Actually, one of the ethical issues related to these cases is pollution. We have environmental pollution, we have water pollution, we have earth pollution, and we have actually the fatal destruction of the environment. Can you go to the next slide? So here we are going to talk about the impact on society and the economy, and also the political forces or political dynamics due to such a ethical disaster. So first of all, we have to realize, as my friend Nick Harrison has highlighted before, like people like have to flee from this area because of the high level of heavy chemicals such as lead, zinc and stuff like that. And we all know that like lead is very harmful to health and also cognitive abilities. And also workers, as a parent Dang has highlighted, this like was a booming city for mining. So when the city was shut down, of course people are workers has to move elsewhere. So I will point out some reason for such unethical conduct. And first of all, I will say, like at that time when people were mining, I think it was like wartime, and during wartime, everyone is trying to do their best to protect themselves. And most of the time, you tend to do not care about the impact of our on action in the near future. And I believe it's what happened. So the companies did not make rigorous research and experiments concerning the impact of the heavy chemicals on the environment. and also a lack of precautions.
So for Flint, Michigan, it was the birthplace of General Motors at one point and was home to hundreds of thousands of residents. They formerly got their water from Lake Huron from Detroit, and that was up till 2012. And in 2013, in order to save money, they changed their water source to the Flint River. Engineers were told to work with what they had, and the move was in order to save $1 million a month in water transportation fees from Detroit to Flint, Michigan. The corrosive water of the Flint River broke down the insides of the pipes that were already there and allowed lead to leak into the water. The engineers and politicians neglected to return to the Lake Huron source several times, and they also neglected to add a chemical to the water that had been approved by many engineers that would make it actually drinkable. Ultimately, the water source was eventually switched back, and after many deaths and injuries due to the contamination and poisoning, they made the final decision that it would return to Lake Huron.
The ethical and criminal issues involved in Flint started with the failure to create a deal with DWSD for Lake Huron water. This forced Flint residents and officials to resort to the Flint River. The only study about the Flint River and how to treat its water was back in 2002. The last time the FWSD was used was about 50 years ago when they switched to Lake Huron water. So they were very underprepared to take on the Flint River. This led to an underestimation of the corrosivity of the water, and studies were commissioned too late. During the discussion of moving back to the Flint River for water, officials in the Governor's Office of Urban and Metropolitan Initiatives sent out an email regarding his concerns for the rush to put out Flint River water. Citizens also voiced their opinions once they started to realize the state of the water that was being put out, and health issues began to arise. Reasons for unethical decisions in Flint were caused by Flint officials deciding to try and save money by joining a new association that was building a water pipeline from Flint to Lake Huron. But with the failure to come up with a deal for water while that pipeline was being built, they ended up going back to Flint water. Because the Flint water service was unused for about 50 years, people were underprepared for dealing with the polluted waters of the Flint River.